Ladies and gentlemen, the results are in. The artisan figure space still has a hard-on for the Mos Eisley Cantina, the Next 17 has leveled up, and Stan Solo delivers some long-awaited characters. Alright, let's get right to it. We'll start with Stan Solo, who has released a long-awaited pair of characters that slipped through the cracks at Lucasfilm's legal department back in 1977 because the twin actresses didn't sign release forms. That is the Tonica Sisters set. As always, Stan Solo has done an amazing job on this pair of characters. They look just like they did in the movie, but in that vintage Kenner style. And he's made sure to really differentiate them through their paint schemes because these are twins, so it's very easy to end up making two figures that look almost identical, but their costumes were different. And he also gave us the added benefit of newly sculpted blaster accessories, which, even though he's not offering these in a Power of the Force card back, I really wish he was, because the way he's designing the weapons these days, it really feels like a simulation of what if Kenner's Power of the Force run had a second wave or a second year, like a 1986 wave. Because a lot of the accessories in the Power of the Force line, particularly the blasters, were headed in that direction of smaller and more detailed. These are going to look great in your Cantina display, whichever playset you have, whether it's the Kenner original or the cardboard Power of the Force 2 one, or the later Build-A-Bar version, or the HasLab Cantina Mammoth. The Tonica Sisters are going to look great. They're an essential part of the Cantina scene, and I'm really glad to finally have them in a Kenner style. Next up is Stan Solo's newest Astromech droid, R4E1. Now, it's well established by now that Stan Solo does the best vintage variant Astromechs on the market, and this one is no exception. This one comes from Mos Eisley once again, but it's not in the Cantina because, as we know, droids weren't allowed in there. This is actually the Astromech that rolls by in the foreground when Luke and Obi-Wan are finalizing the deal for selling the land speeder and then heading to Docking Bay 94. Again, Stan Solo knows how to look in the backgrounds and look in the different shots and find those beautiful Astromech variants that they built in scores for that movie that never really got figures in the Kenner line for some inexplicable reason. And this one looks just as good as all of his others, and it's going to look great in the Kenner Streets Cantina playset. I can't wait to put it there. He's really going to be another contributing factor to filling out those busy Mos Eisley streets, and it's going to look great on display. Now let's talk about the Next 17, because they have come out with, I believe it's their Wave 5, and they have really leveled up their game. There was a lot of criticism, the last few videos I've done from people who felt like the Next 17, while they delivered on their toys, their sculpting and their scaling and some of their paint choices just weren't up to par. Some people said they didn't like the overt reuse in a lot of their waves, which I do think makes sense when you're an artisan toy maker trying to economize to get multiple figures out at the same time. But I do understand the criticism when it came to that Tatooine Cantina Aliens wave, where everybody was just kind of in the same Tatooine tunic, just repainted. However, I do think he got away with it because a lot of the figures were background characters, but the scaling of the human figures was off a little bit. Luke Skywalker and Uncle Owen, they tower a little bit over the vintage counterparts. Now, you can get away with that with Wooher the bartender and even Uncle Owen, but when it comes to Luke Skywalker, that starts to become a problem. This time, though, with this wave, something has turned a corner. I don't know what notes he sent back to the people he's working with or what revisions he made, but for Wave 5, the Next 17 has dialed in the Kenner scale, and the fit, the finish, the materials have all leveled up. I'm not sure what's happened here. And again, I was always a Next 17 supporter. I've always liked his stuff. But this wave, I'm not really sure what happened, but I'm glad it did, because now he's really a competitor for my attention, and I can't wait to see what the Next 17 does next. We'll start with his bevy of new Imperial officers, which are a welcome addition to any Kenner display, because as you know, Kenner only made one version of the Imperial officer, Imperial Commander, who is technically General Veers, but he came in a black New Hope officer's uniform. So he doesn't really fit into any Empire Strikes Back, Star Destroyer kind of environment. He's more New Hope specific, but he came out in the Empire Strikes Back line Ugh. What Next 17 has done is they've given us what I call the top brass Imperial officer, the one in the white tunic. Some people break him out now post Rogue One and post Andor as a kind of intelligence officer, but the white tunic also symbolized Grand Admirals and things like that. And all those guys that were sitting around that table on the Death Star with Grand Moff Tarkin in the original film, I never got the sense that they weren't top brass. A lot of them looked like they were very high-ranking officers. So he's given us one of those, which you could say is Krennic on some level if you wanted a Kenner-style Krennic. But he also is just a good generic Imperial white-tunicked top brass officer. The sculpting has really improved on the faces for the Next 17 human figures with this officer. He's got a great custom blaster accessory that he holds really well. The fit and the finish of the plastic and the paint has really gone up. Again, I don't know what he did with this wave and what instructions he gave, but he's clearly figuring this out, no pun intended, and he's not just sitting on his laurels coasting on what he's already achieved. The Next 17 is trying to get better and better, and that is a huge positive indicator for the future of this artisan maker. And something akin to the Hoth Han Solo debate as to whether or not his coat was blue or brown. Yes, we know it's brown, but it does present blue in the movie. But I'm talking about the debate, not the literal fabric. He's done the same thing with the officers, where the next two officers are your standard Imperial officers, but there's always been an argument as to whether or not the uniforms are gray or an olive green. To settle the debate, he's given us both. He's given us officers that have the dark gray, and he's given us officers that have the green. So you can choose which versions you would prefer to army build with, which is a really awesome touch. Lastly, for the Imperials, he's given us the Imperial Technician from the Death Star, and he has a nice custom sculpted torso and waist piece to reflect the way his uniform looked versus the Imperial officers. Remember earlier I talked about how the Next 17 was sometimes being criticized for heavy reuse. Well, here, he didn't reuse the Imperial officer's uniform and just paint it blue and hope for the best. He actually sculpted the correct uniform stitching for this character, and it looks great. He comes with a miniaturized version of the equipment box he pushes up to the Falcon. It is quite undersized, but I'm glad it's included nonetheless, and it does have an opening lid. Next up is an addition I didn't see coming, and that was Bacta tank Luke Skywalker, and he comes with the Bacta tank, which is a nice touch. I've heard some criticisms and read some criticisms online of this release from the Next 17. Some people aren't really liking the face and hair sculpt. I don't think there's ever been a Bacta tank Luke Skywalker attempted where people liked the way his head sculpt looked. I've never heard anybody compliment any of the attempts at the Bacta tank Luke head sculpt. It is a guy in a huge future diaper floating in water with his face all beaten up and his hair floating around. I would say that's pretty hard to achieve a pleasing aesthetic with that. In this case, I think what's hurting the sculpt in the perceptions of a lot of people's eyes is it is strange that the breather wasn't sculpted onto his face, because you never see this version of the character without the breather on. Luke is always seen with the breather hose in the tank. So not including it, it takes some of the context away. And I think that's what's lending to people not being wild about the face sculpt. I think if that breather hose was on there with the wounds and the floating hair, I think this figure would sell a lot better in the eyesight of collectors. As it is, though, it's the first and only Kenner-style Bacta tank Luke I have. I think it looks fine in the tube. I can't wait to put it on display with my Hoth stuff next to 21B and FX7. It is odd, though, that the breather hose wasn't included as a part of the sculpt, but there must be a reason for that. Not sure what, but maybe he assumed that Kenner wouldn't have done that for this figure. I don't know. I think the argument could go both ways. But as it stands, I don't have the same level of critical complaint about this figure that I've seen some people discuss. And it's always really cool to get stuff from The Empire Strikes Back for vintage Kenner in artisan form, because the Mos Eisley Cantina is like the thing that artisan makers just won't let go of. And that includes, Stan Solo and other people. So to get something from the other films is always a treat, and especially to get something from Empire and Hoth especially is really, really awesome. And then it's Luke Skywalker as well. I wish the breather apparatus had been sculpted to his face. I think that would have made it perfect as a Kenner style attempt. All right, so now it's time to talk about that fixation on the Mos Eisley Cantina. We now have two very well done new aliens from the Mos Eisley Cantina scene that were not made by Kenner. It's the two dudes in the red officer looking suits with the big gloves, and they've got kind of the dog faces. I know they've got real names that are licensed by Lucasfilm. I don't really care what those names are because I always try and think about what Kenner would have called them. You know, like Walrus Man, Hammerhead, Yak Face. So I don't know if these guys would have been like Dog Boy and Hound Man or something like that. I mean, they would have been called something fun and ridiculous, but they are recognizable aliens from the Mos Eisley Cantina. And before you jump and say, oh, there's that Next 17 reuse again, if you actually go and look at the costumed characters from the Mos Eisley Cantina of these two aliens, you will see that they are wearing maroon and or red versions of the Imperial officer's tunic and pants and boots. So these are actually a very reuse appropriate character application. This was like the perfect place for the Next 17 to come in with its propensity for reuse and say, I'm going to do a bunch of variant officers with the different uniform colors, and then I'm going to take out these two Cantina aliens while I'm at it because they're literally in the same costumes, just in different color fabric. And these two guys are going to look great in any Cantina display, just like the Tonica sisters. They're a little more obscure than the Tonica sisters, but they're in that nice Kenner style with a brightly colored deco. So they're going to go well standing next to Greedo and Walrus Man and those early 1978-79 first 21 figures. All of these Next 17 figures have come with new blaster accessories, both the officers and the aliens, and they're great in the sense that they're well sculpted, they fit in the hands really well, but if you're somebody that prefers the Kenner style accessories, you're gonna have to track down Kenner blasters to put in their hands. I'm not gonna do that personally because I think these look really good, but if you have a mind to do that, you're gonna wanna seek out vintage blasters, just to let you know, because he's not reproducing vintage blasters here with these figures. And finally, we get to the gem of this entire run for the Next 17, at least from my perspective, and that is he did a special figure of the Marvel Comics Jabba the Hutt from 1977. Back before we knew that that was a deleted scene in the movie, and back before we had the footage from Star Wars to Jedi documentary showing the large, exuberant Scottish actor who was standing in for Jabba, and then the special effects didn't work, so they deleted the scene, refilmed all that dialogue with Greedo in the bar. Before we knew any of that, we read the Marvel comic, and we saw Jabba the Hutt in that comic years before Return of the Jedi. And he was yet another one of these dog-faced alien guys, and he was clearly taken from those reference photos from Lucasfilm of the aliens from the Cantina, and so they put him in the officer's uniform again with that same alien face, and they just colored the uniform differently in the coloring of the panels of the comic. And since the Next 17 was doing a run of figures that all wore that uniform, he went ahead and made Marvel Comics Jabba the Hutt. And I gotta tell you, I was kind of thrilled when I saw that, honestly. You know how some people are really into the holiday special, and you're glad that they're happy about it, but it's not really your thing, but you kind of understand the kitsch factor? I'm that way with expanded universe stuff. So if I see something pulled from the Marvel Comics, like Jackson the Space Rabbit or Marvel Comics era Jabba the Hutt, you know, from that one comic, because eventually they did the Return of the Jedi adaptation and they had to get Jabba the Hutt right. They finally had a reference. But just the fact that they attempted Jabba without knowing anything about what he was going to really look like, and Lucasfilm didn't bat an eye. I love having this figure in my collection now. He looks good. He's got the same fit and finish. He's got a nice soft goods green cloak as well. And it's just cool to have one of those little relics. I hope one day to see a vintage Kenner style Jackson Space Rabbit as well. That would be awesome. And of course, I'd love to have, you know, vintage Kenner Mara Jade, vintage Kenner Dark Forces 1 Kyle Katarn. You know, things like that would be a lot of fun. Vintage Kenner X-Wing pilot Koran Horn. But in the meantime, I will be very happy with my Marvel Comics Jabba the Hutt Kenner figure. I don't know, that one just jazzed me. I was like, that's awesome. All in all, this was a great figure update from Stan Solo and the Next 17. I love what these guys do. I love what they're continuing to attempt and pursue when it comes to mining for those characters from the Star Wars universe that never got the Kenner treatment that people might be interested in. I can't wait to see what Stan Solo has on the horizon, as always, because that guy is always coming up with the best ideas and finding the coolest figures you never realized you wanted from the background of the original trilogy. By extension, the Next 17 has leveled up its quality and its scaling in a big way. Like, these figures are now not only, a more Kenner-esque fit and finish with the plastic and the paint, but they've also been properly scaled now, so they don't feel slightly oversized. And all of that, including his improved human face sculpting and paint applications, that's all lending to a very promising and exciting future for the Next 17. I can't wait to see what happens with Wave 6. We've come a long way since Mon back in the day, who was a fun figure, and it was good that he was able to be simplified as kind of a resin figure with, some moving arms. He picked the right character to get started with. But now I can feel the confidence with the Next 17. I can feel there are good things coming. This is very promising, and I hope that the momentum for it doesn't stall because of, global economic forces or anything like that. I hope there's not some monkey wrench thrown into his momentum. Not that I'm trying to say that out loud, because that would affect everybody, but it would be really cool to see what he does next. I cannot wait to see what Wave 6 looks like. I do want to go back and get a few of the Next 17 figures that I missed, but I don't think some of them are in stock anymore, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do. There were some, I think, Wave 2 or 3 Jabba aliens, and there's a Rebel hangar crewman that just came out that I would love to get. But again, it's all about patience and time. It took a long time to get the Tonica sisters and R4E1 because they were selling so well that they were just out of stock all the time. And then I finally was able to get myself my set of them just a few weeks ago. And the links to both of those stores, Stan Solo and the Next 17, are in the description of the video. I can't wait to see what they do next. I love these two artisans. May there be many more years ahead for them, because I'll be there. I'll be there, and I can't wait to see what my Kenner displays end up looking like, say, in another 4 years. Isn't it weird to think that it's 2025, we are 40 years out from the end of the Kenner vintage line, and we're getting stuff like this? I just think that's really cool. All right, I'll stop waxing poetic now. So thanks for watching this, and I'll see you on the next video.